Welcome back to AICE Textbook Translations. This is our unit on AICE International History. This will not only review and recap the concepts of the book, but also translate them into modern words so you can get the information right through your smart, beautiful brain. I am your host, Jorge Dagger. Let's get right into it. Okay, so we're back in Europe. World War One is raging. Like, they are going at each other's throats. The girls are fighting. But Russia's also fighting inside their own. You see, basically, Russia was going through what we call a Tsarist system, which is a political system which existed in Russia at the beginning of the 20th century. All the power was inside the Tsar. The Tsar was like the emperor, and he controlled all the functions and like systems of government that were inside of Russia. And people were like, you know what, we're low-key tired of this. So they started revolting throughout World War One because they had mutinies, the soldiers were rebelling against the officers. Everything was just a whole mess. Like, Russia was... And basically what ended up happening was that with Russia going through all this, they decided to form a provisional government and have the Tsar abdicate. This provisional government was not successful either, and the Communist Revolution, the Bolsheviks, led by Lenin, a very important figure in this chapter, they overthrew the government. And one of the goals of the communists was to end the war with Germany. So basically, Russia used to extend all the way to Warsaw in Poland and all the way to Siberia in Asia. They were like this huge. They controlled like 16% of the world. Huge country. But then, to get out of the war earlier than, because they didn't know it was going to end in 1918, so they left in March of 1918 by the signing of the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. This treaty basically took away from Russia all the territory from Poland to Ukraine. So Russia had just lost so much territory. They lost around 25% of their population because that was a heavily populated area. They lost like 11% of their territory. They lost so much of everything. They lost coal mines, industry, because those were highly industrialized lands. You couldn't industrialize Siberia, so they industrialized in the lands that they lost, and that was very, very bad for Russia. However, just a few months after Russia surrendered, in November of 1918, the war ended. And this just kickstarted a whole other mess. Like a whole other just a whole mess, guys. This led to the Paris Peace Conference of 1919. During this peace conference, basically, the countries that had won the war, they met up in Paris, in different palaces of Paris, and they decided to draft up terms for the countries that lost. Like, oh, you lost the war, so you have to pay, so you have to do this. Like, and they were hitting them hard, like, kind of like when they were trying to guilt trip them into doing stuff. Like, generally, like, oh, they were like, oh, so you don't want to do this? Oh, so you want to continue fighting and destroy your economy? And then the people who lost were like, okay, so never mind. So actually, I will do whatever you say. So yeah, it was a whole mess. And basically, the victorious nations met in Paris, all across Paris. They went to different palaces to sign treaties. And there was the Council of Four, which was Wilson, which was Woodrow Wilson, President of the United States, George Clemenceau, Prime Minister of France, Lloyd George, Prime Minister of the UK, and Vittorio Orlando, the Prime Minister of Italy. And out of those, Vittorio Orlando ended up leaving early because he couldn't speak English. So it's like they were all like, they were all reaching flow state, and this guy was over here like only speaking Italian. He did not know where he was doing. He did not know where he was at. Like, he was completely lost. So then they made the big three, which were Wilson, Clemenceau, Lloyd George, and yeah, those three. Yeah, the big three. So those three, they ended up leading the whole thing, basically. However, Wilson had this huge thing where he had promised peace during times of war. So he promised that they wouldn't get involved with Europe, but then they got involved. So when midterm elections came in America, the whole Senate, which is one of the two houses of government in the United States, and they can only enter into treaties with Senate approval. Wilson was a Democrat, and in the midterms, due to high dissatisfaction with his wartime policy, the Senate flipped, and it became a Republican-led Senate. So they were really strict on ratifying things, and to ratify is to give formal acceptance of something, whether it's negotiating a treaty and you have to ratify it, which means that you formally accept it. All of that was very important. So also, Clemenceau was a very important figure. Clemenceau wanted Germany to suffer because France had already been humiliated by Germany not once but twice in less than 100 years. And they were like, oh, this cannot keep happening. Like, we are France. We are amazing. So they really wanted Germany to suffer. Like, they wanted to drive Germany through the ground. Like, they wanted Germany to end up broke, no home, no car, no nothing. Like, literally, they wanted to be flat out broke. And you had Lloyd George, he wanted Germany to pay because Germany did do a lot of damage to Britain too. However, he wanted to keep them as a trading partner. He wanted to keep them as an ally because they were all afraid of the spread of communism. And communism is a system of government based on the idea that a class of society exists, which means that no one is different, there's no rich, there's no poor, everyone's just equal. However, then they decided to formally ratify treaties. They made 5 different treaties: Versailles, Saint-Germain, Neuilly, Sèvres, and Trianon. All these treaties were signed in different parts of Paris. First, let's start off with the most famous one, which is the Treaty of Versailles, which was signed with Germany. Germany lost so much territory. Germany lost territory in Prussia, which is Poland. They lost Alsace-Lorraine to France. They gave Eupen and Malmedy back to Belgium. And they gave Nord-Schleswig back to Denmark. However, the main thing that they were worried about is losing lands in Prussia, since that was where Germany originated from. That was Germany's homeland. But it was also a Polish homeland, so they gave it to Poland. And there were no plebiscites, and a plebiscite is when people like you and me, like an election on what happens with our territory and our land and what happens with our lives. There was none of that conducted. And also, Germany was forced to reduce their armed forces down to 100,000 men. Which you may think, wait, didn't Germany have a huge empire to control? Not anymore, because that was more territory they lost. And these were turned into mandates by the League of Nations. The League of Nations basically said that these mandates had to remain under League of Nations control, and no country could take them. But this was hypocritical. These things were taken away from Germany, and then France took them, Britain took them under their wing, and it was just a whole mess. Then they were forced to reduce their army to 100,000 men, which, in case you were thinking, it's not only not enough to defend their empire, it's also not enough to defend their little Germany. Like, they couldn't defend anything. If people started uprising tomorrow, Germany was lost. Germany was like, oh, where am I? We don't know either, babe. We don't know where you are, because you're lost. And they also had to admit that they were guilty for the war. Like, Germany had to say, listen, I caused the war, even though it started with the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, which was from Austria, and Austria started declaring war on people. Germany had to say, I caused the war, or else there wouldn't be peace treaty. And that meant there would be no peace, and that meant that the war would continue going. So Germany was like, you know what? I've been through enough. I'm not going to go through more. Like, why am I doing this to myself? Not worth it. No, thank you. So they went along with it. The treaty also forbidden Anschluss, which is the unison of Germany and Austria. These countries were very ethnically similar. They both spoke German, but they wanted Germany to be powerless, right? That's why they reduced their military. They took away territory. But if they took Austria, they would have more power. So they were like, you know what? No, you can never take Austria again. And in order to also more debilitate Germany, they made them pay reparations, which were these huge, not even taxes. They were these huge things that, okay, basically, since you caused so much damage, pay, and just keep paying. That was basically what they did to Germany. Germany obviously wasn't happy with this, but whatever, they had to accept it. Now the Treaty of Saint-Germain, which was signed with Austria, this treaty was where we start seeing the idea of self-determination, which is basically the idea of a people of a common nationality should have the right to form their own country. So, Venezuelans should have Venezuela, Americans should have America, the French should have France, but some nationalities were under foreign control, especially inside of Austria and Hungary. Austria had Galicia, which was mainly Polish and Ukrainian. They had Bohemia and Moravia, which were mainly Czech. And they had Istria, which was mainly Slovenian. This was so controversial, not at the time when Austria was formed, but at the time of World War I ending, because one of Wilson's 14 points was entirely self-determination. Like, countries should have a right to exist. And Austria was in violation of this, so they would get so much of that land taken away. That was the main thing with Austria. Now, moving on to Hungary, since Austria and Hungary were basically one union, Hungary also lost a lot of land to self-determination causes, since they lost Transylvania to Romania, they lost Slovakian lands to, well, Czechoslovakia, and they lost their southern Slavic lands in Dalmatia, Croatia, and Bosnia to the Yugoslavs. This led to a lot of successor states. A successor state are newly formed states whose territory and population were previously under the sovereignty of another state. So in this case, the Dalmatians, the Yugoslavs, they were formerly under the control of the Hungarians in the most part, and now they're free, so they're a successor state of World War One. Then they negotiated the Treaty of Nulley with Bulgaria. This treaty was not really that harsh on Bulgaria, mainly just making them pay a few reparations and forcing them to give up some lands, especially to Romania, and give up some lands to Greece, especially Thrace, which was very important to Bulgaria. But they had to give it up, and the treaty wasn't that bad with them. Now, Turkey got carved up like a pumpkin. Yeah, that's sad. Turkey basically got carved up in a way that's so indescribable. They took away their Middle Eastern lands and split them up between the powers, and they took away so much land, basically shrinking Turkey from like this to this. And that's basically caused so much controversy inside international law. But they had to admit it, they had to accept these terms, or the war would never end. Okay, so you guys remember how I said that Germany was forced to pay so much money that it was unreal? Well, basically, while it may seem bad to us, back then they were like, listen, Germany started this whole war. They admitted it. You know, war guilt clause, guys, keep up. Germany made this whole war. They made this whole issue. Like, they made us poor. So now we're going to make them poor. You know, revenge tactics always work. And basically, that's what they did. They imposed $6.6 billion reparations on them. Yeah, that's right. $6.6 billion. However, not everyone agreed with this. Wilson personally thought that this was just creating more conflict. Like, of course, like, then Germany's going to be mad about this, and then they're going to... No. He had some foresight, you know? He thought about the future. Lloyd George did agree with reparations, but then he said, like, you know what? Maybe not too much. Like, let's not lean too hard into it because, you know, we don't really want Germany to be our enemy. But Clemenceau was like, no. Put more reparations, more money, keep them weak, France strong, basically. So imagine them at a table. Imagine Wilson being like, guys, chill, and then Lloyd George being like, Clemenceau, like, come on, guys, come on, and Clemenceau being like, France strong, Germany weak. Yeah, it's a whole mess. That was basically the Paris Peace Conference, you know? And basically, to not overwhelm and to actually have good people on them, they set a reparations commission. This meant these people were in charge of putting the reparations on the countries. They decided to put $100 million on Bulgaria, which were paid off by 1932 when they abandoned the requirement. They put some on Turkey, but these lasted for like 2 years since the Treaty of Lausanne that came like 2 years later. Just like abolished them. And then they put $6.6 billion on Germany. Now, while you may think that a lot of people agreed with this, that simply wasn't true. One of the main people who disagreed with this was John Maynard Keynes, a British economist who literally said, guys, if we do this, they're not going to be happy. And aside from them not being happy, since he was an economist, he knew about the principle of inflation, which is the process that an increase in the price of goods and services drives down the value of an income and savings, discouraging investment and causing demand for increased wages. So basically, it's things are worth more. So my money, I spend on less things. And I want more money, but there's no more money. So we're simply screwed. And that was what happened in Germany. And basically, John Maynard Keynes, an economist, said, okay, guys, like, let's not go too hard. I understand we're mad. I understand we're heated, but this could really ruin the lives of many German people. And that's exactly what happened. And now look where we are. All right, so just like any other world event, the Paris Peace Conference had very mixed reactions. Like, really, like, there are people who supported it, people who didn't like it. Now, the main reactions we care about are those of the victors and the defeated nations, which is basically the people who won and the people who lost, the haves and the have-nots. So let's start with the haves. France was low-key pleased a little bit, but then they were also like, okay, like, I got what I wanted, but not really, because why is Germany not crying? Why is Germany not begging for help right now? Which they were, but France didn't even want Germany around. So it's like, they're like, okay, so like, we kind of got them where we wanted them, but not really. Russia was not even there. because you know how I said previously that Russia had negotiated their treaty early, and that Russia was like got out in March instead of November. Well, they weren't invited. They were like, okay, what not? But Russia was pissed because Russia was like, guys, I helped you for like most of the war, and I'm not invited. And the allies were like, is someone talking? Like, I don't hear anyone talking. Like, guys. Italy, which was represented by Vittorio Orlando, who could not speak English and therefore couldn't communicate as efficiently with the other members of the committee, they did not get the territory they were promised. They were fuming because they were promised Dalmatia, Istria, all those things, and they all went to Yugoslavia. They got a bit of Istria, but not as much as they had been promised. So now they were all like, okay, I see how it is. I help you, I betray my alliance with Germany and Austria, and you still make me a loser. And they were just pissed, obviously. And as for the U.S., you remember how I said the Senate had to approve the treaties and the Senate was against Wilson? In case you were surprised, the Senate rejected the Wilson-led peace agreement, and they were forced to sign another treaty with Germany on their own. And as it came to the defeated nations, or the have-nots, Bulgaria and Turkey were pissed because they were like, okay, we were like such a good country, we were a big, huge country, and now we're like being dragged through the ground and being made Europe's toy. And they were like, no, what? I don't like this. However, no one was more pissed than Austria and Hungary, because Austria and Hungary were this huge empire that was seen as a world power, and now they were getting their lands just taken away, like as if they were some little country that didn't matter. And they were like, you know what? No, I'm too good for this. They had a huge ego. So basically, think of Austria and Hungary as like a toxic talking stage who has a huge ego and doesn't deserve it because they can't even defend themselves. Well, that's them. But they still had a huge ego. They didn't care. They had this huge ego. They were like, no, we deserve land. We didn't do anything wrong, when they literally started the war. So I don't know what they were on about. And Germany, oh my God, Germany was livid. Germany was like, guys, hold me back before I actually start throwing hands with these people, okay? Germany did not resented the war guilt clause because they were like, okay, so we all did damage, but just because I did the most damage, I'm the only one that was at war. Because the war guilt clause wasn't just, oh, I started it. The war guilt clause was, I was the only one at war, basically. And Germany was like, guys, did we not see Britain fighting? Did we not see France fighting? And obviously the Paris Peace Conference that was led by the haves, or the victors, they were like, actually, no, we didn't see Britain fighting. We just saw you fighting like a lunatic. And this led to so much resentment in Germany. Also reparations. Just like our boy JMK, John Maynard Keynes, had predicted, this caused inflation. An economist, knowing about an economy, guys, life-changing information over here. But basically, he knew what he was doing. And they were like, you know what? Nah. I'm the prime minister. He's the president. We know what we're doing, guys. Don't talk to us. You little economist talking about an economy. Who do you think you are? Well, he was right. This caused inflation. The German people weren't happy. And Germany was like, okay, now I'm even more pissed at you guys for causing inflation and causing like people to be unhappy with my country. And then to add insult to injury, they took away so much countries. And remember those countries that I said that the League of Nations was supposed to keep, the mandates, the African territories? Well, France and Britain just went straight at them as soon as he took them. Like, there was no control. France and Britain were like, okay, mine. And they were like, whoa, slow your roll. Because, like, what the heck is going on? And they were right, because, like, you told me these were going to go to the League of Nations. And now they're going to the people who just defeated me. So they're basically taking territory away from me. Everyone's just mad. No one was completely happy. And this is basically going to define the rest of this chapter. So if you want to revisit this section of 2.1c so and so often, you really should. Because the whole chapter is basically going to be Germany being mad, France being mad, Italy being mad, Russia being left out, and the USA just being bipolar about a bunch of things. So if you guys want to refresher on this every so often, come back to this section of the video. Okay, so now do you guys remember the term that I said earlier of successor states? Well, there were 5 successor states that were left after World War I, 5 main ones. They were Yugoslavia, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Austria, and Hungary. Now, before you start, yes, Austria and Hungary did exist before the war, but they were severely reduced. They got their monarchies taken away, so they were basically a whole new country, whole new system, whole new everything. So, you know, it's like new year, new me for them. Let's start with Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia had a lot of ethnic, cultural, and religious identity. This led to basically a lot of minority groups. Minority groups are people who are united by like religion, language, or folklore, but they live in a country where the dominant culture is another culture. So in Yugoslavia, the dominant culture was Orthodox Christian Serbs. This left out Bosnian Muslims, Croatians who were Catholic, and Muslims in Kosovo. So not everyone was happy. Now, once again, I'm gonna say this a lot during this because things just keep getting worse. So I'm gonna say this phrase a lot to add insult to injury. King Alexander I became a dictator in 1929. Now, a dictator is someone who has control over a country, absolute control over a country, without being held accountable by a national assembly or any form of government, like a parliament. So they just do whatever they want. They just come, destroy, make, build, all up to them. Now, this control, severe control over the economy, over like every aspect of life that King Alexander I had starting in 1929, led to a lot of economic and financial problems. Also, the struggle of being a new country, guys. Like it's not easy to be a new country, and they were suffering this a lot during the 1920s, and they had a lot of economic and financial problems throughout the decade. The next one is Poland. Poland was multinational, which once again created minority groups, and to worst part, it contained a lot of German speakers who identified as German. And now they were pissed that they were living in Germany in 1918, and now in 1919 they're living in Poland, where they are a minority. So we just made a whole nother mess. What the frick? Guys, we were supposed to make peace, not more conflict. But this is Europe. It's always going to be conflict, guys. When are we going to learn? We never learn. Basically, this whole mumbo-jumbo of Poland being bad, even after being liberated, even after getting everything, like it was just a whole mess. This disaster led to a military coup trying to restore order in 1926, led by Joseph Pilsudski. And guess what? He became a dictator. And that brought financial problems, but not really. Poland was one of the successor states that was doing pretty well. But they had many border disputes, especially with Czechoslovakia and Germany, because Czechoslovakia and Poland were new, so they were still trying to figure things out. And Germany was old and pissed. So they were just like, boom, 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 boom. And Poland was like, okay, guys, just stop fighting. And they were like, no, we're fighting with you, so don't tell us to stop fighting. Now, Czechoslovakia. Czechoslovakia was a union of Czechs and Slovaks. But inside those territories, there were minority-speaking Germans in the Sudetenland. There was also a lot of religious diversity, ethnic diversity, cultural diversity. You know, since Czechs and Slovaks are similar, but they're not the same. That's why now we have two different countries for them. And needless to say that the German speakers in the Sudetenland were once again not impressed with how things turned out. However, due to Czechoslovakia having such industrializable land, like land that could be turned into industry land, they had a very good economy throughout the 1920s, and they were actually a pretty key world player as it comes to second range countries, and good for them, you know, like you did that. That's all you. And another thing that they were able to do better than our last two guests on our beautiful show was they actually were able to maintain a democracy. Like, they didn't have a single dictator. And guys, when I tell you, like, this might sound like, oh, they were a democracy, okay, whatever, like, it's fine. No, during this time, if you were a dictatorship, you were similar to other countries. But Czechoslovakia was able to keep a democracy, and they did that on their own. So props to them, Czechoslovakia. Now, Austria. Austria used to be huge. Austria used to have a long coastline along the Adriatic. They used to extend all the way into Ukraine, and now they were landlocked. They were like, guys, we just so much aura lost in that moment, like literally. And not only that, but the loss of so much industrial land in Czechoslovakia, because Austria used to own Czechoslovakia, the loss of all that industrial land put their economy down, because Austria was so mountainous, you couldn't industrialize it. It had barely any pastures, barely any plains. It was mainly Alps, so they were like, how are we going to make money? They couldn't trade with ports because they didn't have, you know, access to the sea. They were basically having to refigure out their whole economy. And the public was really enthusiastic to unite with Germany, because they were like, okay, if we can't figure our own stuff out, Germany's going to help us. And they were like, you know what? Germany is doing better than us, at least. You know, something. A win is a win. So that was basically the public support for Anschluss. They really supported it. And now Hungary, which was another one of the halves nots, the have-nots. They got split up by the Treaty of Trianon, and they had economic problems. They had huge economic problems. They had lost a lot of land. Almost the same things as Austria. They had lost a lot of ports, a lot of land. They were now landlocked, so, that caused that. And it was so politically unstable, guys. Super politically unstable. They went to war with Romania in 1922, lost, and when they were getting pushed back, then another dictator came in. Then they became communist. Then they became not communist again. It was a whole... And the worst part is that when the communists came in, they tried to purge out the non-communists. When the non-communists came in, they tried to purge out the communists. And then... just a whole mess, guys. Don't try to understand it. I mean, try to understand it, obviously, for your test. But just understand what I'm telling you guys. Just don't get too deep into this, guys. You're going to get more confused than ever, like, honestly. They were just switching back and forth, trying to kill each other. Why? You got to ask a 1920s European, because I really don't understand it. Also, guys, before we continue, look at this new squishy I got. It's our new co-host. They're learning about history, too, with you guys. If you guys want to find these squishies, just find a squishy. It helps you concentrate more. So if you guys want to concentrate with me, you guys can find a squishy, start squishing it. And it actually helps me a lot during exam season because these help me relieve my stress so much just by squeezing them.